And he didn't have a plan for it. But I said, we can make a plan. I'm going to call him Aaron. We can make a plan. Let's figure this out. I made some phone calls and got him into a college in Southern Illinois that had an academic program that fit his interests, but it also had a reputation as being a pretty strong party school. I just need to confess that, because it's important for the story in December. After his first semester, I was out in the neighborhood, and I lived only 2 blocks from the school where I was principal. Aaron's grandmother lived in the same neighborhood. We ran into each other on the street at Christmas time, and I asked him how college was going, and he said, "Mr. Wright, I never knew life could be so quiet." And I thought, I know where I sent you. That is not a school that has a reputation for being quiet. But what you have to know about Aaron, and even though we didn't always see this in the classroom, Aaron was basically raising his parents, because both of them had significant issues with drug and substance abuse. He was the caretaker for his grandmother. He was helping his siblings and step-siblings, and he bounced between several different residences to do all of this while managing his high school experience. And so for him, being a freshman in college was the quietest his life had ever been. And what I can't help but wonder is, somebody like Aaron, once his mind was finally quiet, what ideas came out? How did his creativity change? How did his innovative brain change when he could actually hear his own brain over the noise that flooded his life all the time? And even though not every kid has a story exactly like Aaron's, we certainly have coworkers, and I have students whose lives are a lot louder and are a lot noisier than we want them to be. And sometimes they hide that noise from us, whether it's in the classroom or as coworkers. But we're never going to get the most creative, innovative, future-thinking student or coworker if that noise is a constant part of their life. And so I'm going to share my screen in a minute here. If you give me that power, Tawana. There we go.
Yeah.
Let me know if you can't see that. There we go.
Yep.
And so as a district, we were focusing this year on empathy because we know that love grows brains. And when I think about the pandemic and the anxiety that has filled our culture, how short-fused so many people are right now, that when I think about our kids, we are lucky that we work with children who still have very plastic brains. We call it neuroplasticity, but it's literally just like their bodies overall. If my 5th grader falls on the ice, he's likely to get right back up and be okay. One of us falls on the ice, we don't get up as quickly. We're less plastic. But their brains are the same sort of flexible plastic until they get actually into their early 20s often. But especially in that age of elementary through middle school, if they grew up in a home or in a life that didn't have a lot of love or stability to it, we can provide that safe, stable, nurturing relationship for that student and literally rebuild their brain in the way that it is able to think and be creative if we intervene at the right time. That's part of the reason why it's so important for us in a school context. So how does empathy fit into this and the way that we do this work with our coworkers? This is a picture of me with my grandfather. I joke that it looks like I grew up in the 1890s. I guess my parents didn't use a color camera in the 1970s when this picture was taken. But I wanted to highlight Pa, my grandpa, because he is the one in my life that taught me to be empathetic and taught me to take a breath when I was angry before responding in a way that would cause other people to respond in a way that I wouldn't want them to. And when there have been a few times in this job that I have received some relatively harsh feedback, sometimes, especially over the pandemic, in ways that are really, really bitter and aimed at my own children. And I always have to ask myself, what would Pa want me to do in the situation? How do I make sure that I continue to maintain a relationship with this person and not immediately go to my worst self? One of the things that Pa helped me develop, and I apologize, the text is small depending on the size of your screen, so let me read it to you, are my mirror neurons. I'm hearing somebody with there we go. Mirror neurons are my ability to feel what someone else is feeling. Mirror neurons fire when you do something, but more important, they also fire in a less intense fashion when you see someone else do the same thing. So I'll give you that example of falling on the ice again. If I fell on the ice right now and you saw it, your brain would actually fire in a less intense fashion than mine because you know what that feels like. And so your brain would actually trick you into experiencing some of my pain because you've been in my shoes. But you only develop these mirror neurons if you've been taught how to see the world from somebody else's shoes earlier in your life. And you have to practice this then through the rest of your life. So I share these pictures because mirror neurons also fire to the positive. It's not only when I fall down on the ice, but it's also like when you see good things. And so these are my kids. And Mason, our son, who's wearing the Brewers cap, I don't care if you fish. I don't know if you like children, but when you see that smile in both of their faces, there are mirror neurons that are firing right now inside of you because you've also been happy. You've also watched somebody else be this joyful, as especially Mason is holding up that nice collection of fish that we caught this past summer. But mirror neurons have to be developed through practice, and empathy can wither away if we don't practice it. And that's one of the things that I feel is important for us to talk about as employers and employees and managers and supervisors and teachers, is how do we do some practicing so that the skill of empathy, the skill of nurturing, the skill of having healthy relationships doesn't go away. The book that we've used in the district to help guide our reflection on this is a book called Born for Love. If you want to read part of it or all of it, we've got copies at the district office that you can borrow, so you don't have to buy it yourself. Just stop by my office, the district office. We'll make sure to get you a copy. But it really is this. In many different case studies, the authors Maya Salovitz and Bruce Perry talk about the necessary skills of having good empathetic relationships in order to create a creative, innovative, future-thinking mind. Which my assumption is that you want creative employees and teammates, innovative teammates. You want employees and teammates that can think of the future, what's coming next. You can't do that if you're under high anxiety. You can't do that if you don't have good relationships. You can't do that if your brain has too much noise to empower it to be creative, innovative, and future thinking. So how do you practice this? That's the question, obviously, us as teachers have to think about all the time, is like, so what could this look like in my classroom? But I also want you to think about what this could look like with your coworkers. And one of the strategies we're using, they're called empathy interviews. And really simply, I'll explain this now, but if you want me to reteach this or come to your office and do this with you, just let me know. If Tawana and I were engaged in an empathy interview, we'd set an amount of time where I only get to ask questions and Tawana is the storyteller. And then we'd switch later on where she would ask the questions and I would be the storyteller. And what you notice is that you listen differently when you're listening for the next question instead of listening for your own response. And that most of our conversations in America, I share something, then Tawana shares something, then I share something, and then Tawana tells a joke, and I laugh, and then I try to one-up her joke. And we go back and forth like that. But if I discipline myself to say, for the next few minutes, all I want to do is ask questions and listen to answers, I grow differently as the listener through my own empathy. But Tawana also has a fundamentally different experience because of the way I'm paying attention to her. Because you can't ask a second question if you're not listening to the answer that's being shared. You can also do this in really simple ways by starting meetings with quick, like this or that questions. Cake or ice cream? Why? Find a partner and share. And what I find out is that Tawana actually likes cake more than ice cream because of this cake that she had that her grandma used to make. And that I find out more about her, and then I get to share about my love of ice cream. And that there are simple ways in very few minutes at the beginning of a class or the beginning of a meeting that I can find connections and trying to help to build those stable, safe, nurturing relationships among teammates, friends, or classmates. This is a pretty easy way to do that. And I encourage finding ways to do empathy interviews. It's awkward at first. It's weird to talk this way and to listen this way, but it has a lot of power once you've tried it a few times. I'll share personally that some of the people who were most angry with my decision-making and the board's decision-making over the past year and a half with the pandemic called all fired up, calling my office, yelling at me, talking about the bad things they want to have happen to my children. It's so easy to just want to like yell back. But often if I just asked a few questions and listened carefully enough to be able to ask a few more questions what was going on with their kids or their lives, that our relationship could change. And one person who often came to board meetings to also tell me how terrible I was as a human came in, and we sat down for almost an hour one day. And without her, I didn't say, I'm going to do an empathy interview on you, because that would be really odd. But I did an empathy interview because I had practiced this. And as we departed, I asked, like, are you a handshake person? Not knowing how we're doing this right now in COVID. And she said, you know, I'd really like a hug. Ooh. And we had a hug in the entrance to the district office. And I thought, you know, I thought you were coming in here so ready to hate me. And we found something about each other over that hour that left her giving me a hug on the way out the door. And I'm so grateful that I had practiced empathy interviews with my teammates so many times, because I needed to go back to that practice. And I needed to go back to what Pa would want me to do in a moment like that. Tawana mentioned like some of the science behind this. And so for those of you who don't want this just to be touchy-feely, but also want like, so tell me more about my brain and what's happening. This is a lot of text as well. But I want to talk about the difference between cortisol and oxytocin. And I'll read this to you. Cortisol, when we face criticism, rejection, or fear, when we feel marginalized or minimized, our bodies produce higher levels of cortisol, a hormone that shuts down the thinking center of our brains and activates conflict aversion and protection behaviors. We become more reactive and sensitive. We often perceive even greater judgment and negativity than actually exists. And these effects can last for 26 hours or more, imprinting the interaction on our memories and magnifying the impact it has on our future behavior. Cortisol functions like a sustained release tablet. The more we ruminate about our fear, the longer the impact. So that's the bad one. Then there's oxytocin, and they're positive comments and conversations produce a chemical reaction too. They spur the production of oxytocin, a feel-good hormone that elevates our ability to communicate, collaborate, and trust others by activating networks in our prefrontal cortex, the front of our brain. But oxytocin metabolizes more quickly than cortisol, so its effects are less dramatic and long-lasting. Like, damn it. Like the good stuff dissipates quickly, while the negative chemical lingers in our brain like that time-release capsule, actually building up in our bodies over time. And so when we're under high pressure, high stress, and have negative relationships in our workplace, in our classrooms, or our homes, we're literally being bathed in the cortisol that makes us harder to think, makes it harder for us to be problem solvers. But occasionally we also get these positive moments when that chemical reaction spurs the opposite part of our brain and energizes our brain and makes us able to be more trusting, more collaborative, and better communicators. What can we do in our organizations to spur more oxytocin production and less cortisol production? And since many of you are on the Economic Development Committee with us at the Chamber, I I appreciate that Tawana almost always has us laughing at the start of that meeting. Like we start with something that I believe gives us that feel good hormone that elevates our ability to collaborate and work with each other. But also, like, I feel the result of being in that room for hours after, no matter what the rest of my day is going to be, because of having that oxytocin jolt as a result of being around people who want to be positive with each other. Here's the end of my substance or my content. This is a quote that we've been using as a district from Viktor Frankl, a neurologist, psychiatrist, philosopher, author, and Holocaust survivor. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. I bet a lot of you deal with customers or with customer service, where over the last year and a half, the distance between stimulus and response has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. Like that space is getting smaller and smaller. We read about it on the airlines. We read about it in customer service. We've seen restaurants in Madison send out messages saying, just please be kind. If you're going to come into our restaurant, treat our servers with respect. Like, we are losing control of this space as a culture. I'm sure we have coworkers who lose this space. I have kids in my 2,800 students that I get to welcome every day who need a lot of practice on how to control that space. But how much power there is when you have control of it. Like how much, when I can hear Pa speaking in my head, telling me to take a breath, respond with love, not hate. Like, how do I find control over that space when I'm stimulated and before I throw out a response that could do more harm than good? So what do I want Sauk Prairie to do? I want us to flood each other with oxytocin. I want to practice empathy and exercise it so that we build those mirror neurons with ourselves and others, so that we know when someone's feeling pain because I feel it myself, and I know someone's feeling joy because I'm celebrating it myself. And all of that to help us better own the space between stimulus and response as a way of all working together to grow our brains through love. I'm going to stop my sharing. I think I've basically hit my target, Tawana. Thanks for letting me go through that quickly.
You did, Jeff, and thank you so much for bringing in a little bit of science behind it. One of the things I want to challenge you all to think about is within your own workplace, your family, your friend groups, is imagine an employee who never had a paw, who never had that positive role model to share a book with them, encourage Q&A on car rides, to make sure there was someone there for a hug if things got tough. And then imagine that same person also being in a home that probably had external stressors, whether it was job loss or drug abuse or just living paycheck to paycheck. We all know how stressful that can be. Now imagine if those neurons never fired along the way, you as the HR manager are now stuck with them, and their response to how to interact in a mixed group setting where some came from backgrounds with that, others did not. Would it change, knowing what you've learned today from Jeff, on how you ask questions of that person or how you respond to comments from that person? So I'm going to pause there, ask you to think about that, but then let's use this time. Jeff's been going through this process now for 5 months, 6 months. And we talked before this, it's not smooth sailing, even for the best of audiences. There's challenges. So if you have questions, best practice questions or lesson learned questions, feel free to ask those. George is asking oxytocin. Oh, hold on. Sorry. Oxytocin have any relationship to endorphins? Any experience with Native American talking stick for one-way speaking, listening?
Thanks for both those questions. Yes, it's a very similar effect on the body, just one more brain-based for the oxytocin and endorphins. we do have some classes that are purposely using, to go to the second question, different strategies to make sure everyone has a turn to be heard. And so, yes, a talking stick often works, or like a squishy ball that isn't going to hurt if you throw it around the classroom. And often, like, whoever has the the ball gets to talk now. At Bridges with our youngest kids, we're doing a lot of collaborative play right now. And so if you came in here on a Wednesday, the whole boardroom is covered with Legos and castle building materials and things, because so many of our youngest kids over the last year and a half haven't had the same level of interactive play. So we have to literally teach them about sharing and collaboration. There are a lot of adults who could use the same lessons. I'm aware of that. And so that is, yes, talking sticks, throwing these balls around, kind of practicing, like, how do you play with a small group, always mixing up the kids that are in there. I'm glad to hear that from maybe parents who are hearing this at home. I think it's working. We're glad to see it working.
Okay. Michelle says the kids are loving Wednesdays, so kudos to you.
I saw Sarah asked a question. So how long is empathy interview for the first time? A few weeks ago, I got to go and do this presentation as part of Adult Sunday School at St. John's. Pastor Sally and Pastor Fred asked me to come by and do that. And they hadn't had coffee hour the entire pandemic. And so we started with 4 minutes. And it was really, like, it was the first time that strangers had interacted in this way in church in over a year. I think 4 minutes was long enough for the first round. The second round, we didn't cut off for like 7 or 8, because they kind of had found their rhythm. And Sally, I could just tell, was almost emotional about it. She's like, I haven't seen them. Like, we haven't done this with each other for so long, and how hungry we were for it. Like the coffee hour type of thing. So I think we usually do 4 or 5 minutes with adults to start, but knowing that it can stretch out. I also encourage you to take a pause between the two shares and ask each other, like, what went well and what was hard. Like, some people struggle to come up with questions. Talk through that. What were you listening for that helped you find more questions? And Sarah, maybe one other tip. I often put 4 or 5 questions up on the big screen or on the chalkboard, or you could hand it on a piece of paper in a smaller meeting, so that if people run out of topics. So I was at the church in November for that presentation. And so I made several questions about gratitude, and about like maybe somebody from your past that maybe you should surprise with a thank you, or someone who surprised you from your past with a thank you. And so giving people some prompts made it easier. So if they ran out of talking and questions after a minute or two, that I could feed them the answers at the start. Because this isn't a skill everybody has, being almost like an interviewer, even with someone they know well.
Sarah says, thank you, Jeff. That was fantastic. Let's use the little raise your hand function in a little bit different way. But if you currently within your workplace or your staff meetings are intentional about starting with a way to get those neurons firing and build relationships, just kind of click your raise your hand button. I'm just curious. There we go. Yeah, some of you I know don't have the option to do that, but you know, for the number of people we have here, it's not surprising to me that in business we go right into the kill of, we need to get production up, or we need to hit our sales quota this week, or so and so was late. And all of those things are very true. But I think taking time to think about what Jeff has shared with us today, and just being humans first, coworkers second, all those things are going to get done. But imagine the creativity and the joy and the little changes you're going to start to see in a workplace if you can be intentional with that. So,
Tawana, if I could share another way to do that, if you are meeting with the same people all of the time, what we've done with our principals, so I have 6 schools, 6 principals, they're each paired up with another principal as the accountability partner for the whole school year. And I start every principals meeting where I've created some questions that I want them to talk about. And often the first one is something personal or about their past or a fun story to share, but then they start focusing on the agenda for the day and what they want to be doing with their work. But having that same person that they come back to every meeting. So I call them together, and then the first 10 to 15 minutes, if you ever see us randomly walking with pairs around Bridges campus, it's probably accountability partners that are going on a short walk, focusing our brains for the meeting, but also connecting with someone that is in a sustained relationship with them over the year, holding them accountable to what they say they're going to do, but also holding them accountable for their own self-care, holding them accountable for, like, maybe there are stresses at home that they've been talking about. I'm going to be your partner through the whole year. So that may be another easy way to do this, but building that relationship with the same person instead of having to always interview somebody new, which may be uncomfortable on some teams depending on the relationship.
Okay, well, we're down to the final minutes of our first ever Chamber Connect. I hope you found the information interesting and something that you can apply right back to your workplace and personal life. One or two last questions for Jeff. Any at all? This session is being recorded today, and we can we're going to have that on saltprairie.com. So if you have it where you want to share with others, I think that's important. And also remember, sometimes the messenger, I could say one thing to a group of people, but if they're comfortable with me or they see me all the time, sometimes it doesn't resonate. But if someone like Jeff that they know of but don't know well shares the same information, maybe it would resonate a little more. So think about the different parties that you can share this with. And thank you all for joining us today. I appreciate it. Jeff, you were a fabulous first guest of the first ever Chamber Connect. We look forward to having you join us again. Michelle Vandehay will be up in a few weeks, and we'll keep the schedule going. If you have topics that you would like to recommend or learn more about, please don't hesitate to email me at executivedirector@saltprairie.com, and we will get that on the list for the 2022 season. So thanks so much. Have a great day.
Great to see you all. Thank you.